Madrid, Friday night, 11:30 p.m. Lucas Moreno, a single dad and an ordinary office worker, spotted his boss, Martina Delgado, completely drunk outside a bar, surrounded by three men who were trying to guide her toward their car. She could barely stand, her silk blouse stained with red wine, her eyes clouded by alcohol. Lucas stepped in without a second thought, firmly pushing the men away and taking Martina home because she couldn't even manage to tell him her address. He settled her on the couch, gave her water, and watched over her all night while his 6-year-old son slept in the next room. Monday morning, when Martina walked into the office, Lucas braced himself for the usual. She'd pretend she didn't remember a thing and keep the same cool professional distance as always. Instead, she did something no one saw coming. She stepped into his office, closed the door, looked him straight in the eye, and whispered words that would change everything. Lucas Moreno was 32 and had built his life around duty. A single father for the past 3 years, ever since his wife Julia died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, he worked as an accountant at Delgado Consulting. It wasn't a job he loved, but it paid well and let him get home by 6 to be with his son Diego. Everything in Lucas's life was organized, predictable, safe. It had to be. Diego was only 6 and had already lost his mom. That November Friday, Lucas stayed late at the office to finish an urgent report. Diego was spending the night at his maternal grandparents' house, their weekly tradition. When Lucas finally left the building, it was almost 11 p.m. As he walked toward the Grand Via metro stop, he saw a scene that stopped him cold. Outside a trendy downtown bar, a woman was staggering dangerously in her heels. Her white silk blouse was stained with red wine, her brown hair loose and messy, her eyes struggling to focus. 3 men surrounded her, hands on her arms and shoulders, insisting they'd take her home. Their car was right there, they kept saying. Lucas was about 60 feet away when a streetlight lit up the woman's face. His heart skipped a beat. It was Martina Delgado, his boss. The 34-year-old daughter of the company's founder, chief operating officer, always flawless, always in control, always 3 steps ahead of everyone. And now she was clearly drunk and in real danger. Lucas didn't think. He crossed the street fast, his voice steady as he told the men to leave her alone. They turned surprised and threatening, but something in Lucas's determination made them hesitate. They probably realized he'd fight if he had to. It wasn't worth it. They walked off, muttering threats. Lucas turned to Martina, who was sliding toward the ground. He caught her before she fell, his arm around her waist, her full weight leaning against him. She mumbled incoherent words. He tried asking where she lived, but nothing she said made sense. He pulled her phone from her purse to look for an address, but it was locked with a passcode. He checked the time. Almost midnight. He couldn't leave her there, and he couldn't put her in a cab in that condition. He made the only sensible choice. He took her to his place. The cab ride was surreal. Martina drifted between moments of near lucidity, mumbling about reports and meetings, and moments when she seemed about to pass out. Lucas held her steady, trying not to think about how inappropriate this all was. She was his boss, the owner's daughter, and he was taking her to his modest apartment in Lavapiés. Helping her up the stairs was a struggle. Every step took huge effort. Inside the small but tidy apartment, with Diego's drawings on the fridge and toys neatly put away, he guided her to the couch where she collapsed immediately. Lucas got water, aspirin, and a basin just in case. He came back and tried to get her to drink. She managed a few sips. Then she suddenly grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, looked at him with suddenly clear eyes, and whispered words that hit him like a punch. Then she slumped back onto the cushion and started snoring softly. Lucas sat in the armchair across from her all night, keeping watch, not out of professional duty, but because it was the right thing to do, and because beneath the smudged makeup and stained blouse he'd seen something in her eyes. Pain, loneliness, something he knew all too well. At 5 a.m., Martina started stirring. She opened her eyes, confused and disoriented, then saw Lucas still awake in the chair. Realization washed over her like a wave. She sat up too fast and groaned, clutching her head. Lucas silently handed her the water and aspirin. She took them swallowed and drank in silence. Then in a hoarse voice, she asked what had happened. Lucas calmly told her everything. How he'd driven off the men. How he'd brought her here because he didn't know her address. Martina listened without interrupting, her face growing redder by the second. When he finished, the silence stretched painfully. Then she simply said, "Thank you." She stood unsteadily, straightened her clothes, and asked if she could call a cab. Lucas did. While they waited in heavy silence, she glanced at the drawings on the fridge, the toys, the photos of Diego. She didn't ask anything, but Lucas could see the questions in her eyes. When the cab arrived, Martina walked to the door. She paused on the threshold without turning around. For a second, it seemed she was about to say something important, then she just nodded and left. Lucas closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. He wondered if he'd get fired on Monday. He wondered if Martina would pretend nothing had happened. The weekend passed in a fog of anxiety. Lucas tried to focus on Diego, but his mind kept replaying that night. The look on Martina's face when she woke up, the way she'd studied his apartment, the heavy silence. Monday morning came too fast. Lucas dropped Diego at school, then took the metro to the office, his heart pounding. He arrived at 8:30, sat at his desk, and turned on his computer. Martina always got in at 9:00. He watched the clock tick minute by minute, his stomach tightening. At 9:05, he saw her walk in, flawless as always. Dark gray suit, heels, hair in a perfect bun. She moved through the open plan office with her usual confidence, greeting people, handing out professional smiles. She didn't glance at Lucas's desk. She went into her office and closed the door. Lucas exhaled. Maybe she'd pretend it never happened and everything would go back to normal. He could live with that. 10 minutes later, the intercom rang. Martina's assistant summoned him immediately. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. He crossed the office feeling everyone's eyes on him. He knocked and entered. Martina was seated behind her desk, hands clasped in front of her. She looked at him with an unreadable expression, then told him to close the door. He did, standing there nervously. Martina stood, walked until she was right in front of him, and looked him straight in the eye. The words that followed shook him to his core. She remembered everything, every detail from Friday night, and she wanted him to know exactly what he'd done for her. Martina explained what had happened. She'd been at a work dinner, drinks, wine, more drinks. She hadn't realized how much she'd had until it was too late. She stepped outside for fresh air and didn't remember much after that. Voices around her, hands on her, fear. Then Lucas's voice sending the men away, how he'd held her up. The cab, his apartment. She remembered waking on the couch and seeing him in the chair, still awake, watching over her. He could have done 1,000 different things, called someone at the company and started gossip, taken advantage of the situation, left her at the bar. He protected her and then let her go without judgment, without expecting anything. Martina's voice dropped, growing more vulnerable. She talked about what everyone thought of her, the boss's daughter, the princess who had everything handed to her. But the truth was she worked twice as hard as anyone to prove she wasn't just the boss's kid. 14-hour days, weekends, no social life, because whenever she went out, people wanted something from her. That night, she'd just learned her father was selling the company she'd helped build for 10 years. He was selling it without even consulting her. When she asked why, he said he couldn't leave it to her because she was a woman and investors wouldn't trust her. So she went to that dinner and drank too much, trying to drown the anger. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. He saw Martina completely differently now. Not the untouchable boss, but a woman fighting just like everyone else. He said softly that her father was making a huge mistake, that he'd seen the report she prepared. She was brilliant. Martina looked at him, surprised. Something in her face softened. She asked about the little boy in the photos. Lucas told her about Diego, 6 years old, and about his wife, gone 3 years ago from a brain aneurysm. Martina closed her eyes. She apologized for everything. Lucas apologized for her father. They stood in silence, two people suddenly seeing each other for the first time. Then Martina switched back to professional mode. She didn't want things to be awkward between them. She knew he could handle it, but she wanted him to know she owed him. Lucas shook his head. There was no debt. He'd just done the right thing. Martina looked at him for a long moment, then smiled sadly. Wow. She told him he was a good man, probably too good for this place. Lucas left feeling strange, relieved he wasn't fired, but also unsettled because he'd seen behind Martina Delgado's mask, and what he saw was someone surprisingly lonely. just like him. In the days that followed, something shifted subtly between them. Nothing obvious, but it was there. When they passed in the hallway, Gina didn't just walk by. She'd stop, ask how he was, how Diego was doing. The conversations weren't long, but they were real. In meetings, she asked for his opinion more often and really listened. 2 weeks after that night, Martina stopped Lucas as he was leaving at 6. In her office, she got straight to the point. She knew he always left at 6 to pick up his son, and she knew it had cost him promotion opportunities. She'd spoken to HR. From now on, all important meetings would be scheduled between 9 and 5. For any essential evening events, the company would cover childcare costs. Lucas stared at her, stunned. She didn't have to do that, but she insisted. He was one of their best accountants and was being overlooked because of a stupid policy. And because Diego had already lost his mom, he shouldn't lose time with his dad to a job. Lucas felt his throat tighten. That night, while cooking pasta for Diego, the boy noticed he seemed happy. Lucas smiled. Yeah, something really good had happened. But it didn't stop there. In the days that followed, there were other small changes. A project Lucas had been stuck on got approved. His ideas were publicly backed by Martina. One morning, he found an expensive dinosaur Lego set on his desk with a handwritten note. That afternoon, he went to her office. Me said the gift was too much. Martina replied it was just a small thing. Lucas insisted he didn't want special treatment. She asked softly if she could call it friendship. She didn't have many friends, and she'd like to have him as one. Lucas looked at her, seeing the sincerity and loneliness, the same thing he saw in the mirror every morning. He said yes, she could call it that. From that moment, something solidified. They were no longer just boss and employee, no longer strangers, but real friends. Martina started stopping by his desk at lunchtime, bringing sandwiches and asking about Diego. Lucas discovered that behind the polished exterior was a funny, smart woman with a sarcastic sense of humor. And slowly, very slowly, both of them began to feel something deeper than friendship, but neither dared admit it. A month later, Martina did something unexpected. She asked if she could meet Diego, not officially, just because Lucas talked about him so much and she was curious. Lucas hesitated. Letting someone into Diego's life was a big step. The boy had already lost too much, but there was something in Martina's eyes, a loneliness that mirrored his own. He said yes. The following Saturday, they met at Readero Park. Martina showed up in jeans and a simple t-shirt, hair down, no makeup. She looked years younger, more vulnerable. Diego was shy at first, but Martina got down to his level and showed him the new Lego dinosaur she'd brought. She started talking about T-Rexes and velociraptors. Within half an hour, Diego was laughing, running, pulling Martina toward the swings. Lucas watched them swinging together and felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. After the park, Diego asked if Martina wanted to come for lunch. She looked at Lucas, the question in her eyes. He nodded. They went back to the apartment. Lucas made pasta. They ate around the small kitchen table. Diego talked nonstop, showing Martina his drawings, toys, and his goldfish named Nemo. When Diego went to play, they sat at the table. Martina said softly how amazing the boy was. Lucas replied that he was everything to him. Sometimes he worried whether he was enough, whether having just one parent was enough when a kid should have two. Martina reached across and touched his hand. She said he was doing an incredible job. Diego was happy, secure, loved. That was more than a lot of kids with two parents ever got. Lucas looked at where her hand touched his and didn't pull away. He admitted how lonely it could get sometimes. Every decision was his. Every worry was his. There was no one to share the load. Martina said quietly that she understood. It wasn't the same, but she understood. She woke up in an empty apartment, went to an office full of people who wanted something from her, came home to an empty apartment. She wondered if there was more. Their eyes met. In that moment, something broke or something was built. Lucas wasn't sure which, but he knew that when he looked at Martina now, he no longer saw his boss. He saw a woman who understood him, who really saw him, who maybe felt the same things. Diego came back and dragged Martina off to play. The moment passed, but something had changed. When Martina left that night, Diego asked when she'd come back. She looked at Lucas. He said softly, "Anytime you want." It became routine. Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. Martina would come over, bring food or games, play with Diego, talk with Lucas. The apartment started to feel less empty. The loneliness that had weighed on Lucas for 3 years loosened its grip. Diego laughed more. He talked about Aunt Martina constantly, and Lucas was falling in love. He didn't want to be. He'd sworn after Julia that he'd never risk his heart again. But watching Martina laugh with his son, seeing her on the couch with Diego asleep against her, hearing her voice fill the silence, he couldn't fight it. He said nothing, though, because she was his boss, because he was terrified that if he ruined the friendship, he'd lose the only person who made him feel alive again, because Diego had grown attached, and if things went wrong, so he stayed quiet. He didn't know Martina was doing the same thing, going home to her empty apartment, wondering how it was possible to fall so completely for a man and his little boy, terrified to say anything because she didn't want to ruin the only real connection she'd had in years. So they both waited, and something beautiful and terrifying grew between them, unspoken but undeniable. 3 months after that night outside the bar, everything changed again. Martina's father publicly announced the sale of the company. Martina was devastated. She called Lucas that night, voice breaking, asking if she could come over. He said yes without hesitation. She arrived with red eyes from crying, makeup streaked. Diego was already in bed. Lucas sat her on the couch and brought her tea. She told him everything: how her father had cut her out of the negotiations completely, how she'd found out from the newspapers, how when she confronted him, he said it was for her own good, that he didn't want her carrying that burden. Martina spoke with rage and pain, as if she were a little girl again, as if the past 10 years meant nothing. Every hour worked, every idea implemented, every client won. None of it mattered because she wasn't a man. Lucas took her hand and said her father was wrong, not her. But she asked what she could do. It was his company. He had the right to sell it. Lucas suggested she start her own. Take the clients who would follow her, build something of her own. Martina said that was crazy. It would take capital, time, risk. But Lucas insisted she was capable, and she wasn't alone. He believed in her, and a lot of people at the company would follow her because they respected her for who she was, not whose daughter she was. Something sparked in Martina's eyes. Or determination. She laughed through tears, asking if he was suggesting a corporate mutiny. Lucas smiled. He was suggesting she take control of her life. And yeah, that might include a little healthy mutiny. Martina laughed, then suddenly hugged him, tight, desperate. Lucas held her, his face buried in her hair, heart pounding too hard, and he knew he'd passed the point of no return. He was completely, irrevocably in love. When they pulled apart, their faces were inches away. Lucas could see every shade in her brown eyes. He felt her breath to breath. He saw the moment she realized it, the moment she read what was written all over his face. She whispered his name. He started to apologize. He hadn't meant. She kissed him, sweet, tender, full of everything neither of them had dared say. When they pulled back, both were shaking. Lucas admitted he didn't know when it had happened. He just knew that watching her with Diego, talking to her, hearing her laugh, it was the first time he'd felt alive since Julia died, and it scared him so much. Martina said it scared her too. She'd never had this. Someone who truly saw her, who cared about her, not what she could do for them. He'd saved her that night, not just physically. He'd shown her there was still kindness in the world. He'd given her friendship when she needed it, desperately. And now she was falling for him and his son and the life they could build together. It was terrifying and wonderful. Lucas kissed her again, deeper, with all the loneliness of 3 years, all the love he thought he'd buried with Julia. He said they had to be sure Diego was ready. He couldn't risk hurting him. Martina understood. They agreed to take it slow as needed, because she didn't want just him. She wanted Diego too. She wanted both of them. She wanted to build something real. Lucas said he wanted that too. God, he wanted that too. God, he wanted that too. 6 months later, Martina stood in front of 20 people in a rented conference room, heart racing. They were all former Delgado Consulting employees who had followed her when she started her own firm. Lucas sat in the front row, an encouraging smile on his face. Diego was with his grandparents, but they'd pick him up together that night. Martina presented the first half results for Marino Delgado Consulting. Yes, Marino Delgado. Lucas wasn't just her partner, he was her business partner too. He turned her crazy plan into reality with solid numbers and concrete strategy. The numbers were impressive. They'd exceeded first year goals in 6 months. They'd landed clients everyone thought were impossible, all because they'd built a company on real values: respect, family flexibility, true meritocracy. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. After everyone left, Lucas hugged her and said how proud he was. She corrected him of both of them. None of it would have been possible without him. That night, when they picked up Diego, the boy ran to them both, shouting with joy, hugging both their legs at once. Martina lifted him, laughing, while Lucas watched. His family, he thought. He thought of Julia, as he often did. He wondered if she'd be happy for him. He thought she would. Later, after Diego was in bed, sitting on the couch, Lucas said nervously that he wanted to talk about something. Diego had asked when Martina was going to move in for good and when he could call her mom instead of Aunt Martina. Martina felt tears rising. Lucas said he'd told Diego they had to ask her, that she wanted to, but they needed to make sure he was ready, and Diego had said he was ready, that he loved her and wanted them to be a real family. Martina cried openly. She wanted that too, more than anything. Lucas pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. He said it wasn't extravagant. He didn't have the budget for huge diamonds. Martina interrupted. She said it was perfect, absolutely perfect. Lucas formally asked if she would marry him, be the wife he never thought he'd have again and the mom Diego had needed. Only if she truly wanted it, if she believed in them, if she thought they could build something real together. Martina said yes through tears, 1,000 times yes. When they kissed, Diego interrupted, coming out of his room because he'd heard voices. Martina knelt and opened her arms. Diego ran to her. She hugged him tight and explained that Daddy had asked her to marry him. She'd said yes. So if he wanted, she would be his mom. Diego pulled back, eyes huge, asking if it was true. Martina said yes. Diego yelled with joy and jumped. Then he hugged them both as hard as he could, saying he had a mom again. Lucas and Martina laughed, holding the boy between them. A family born from a night of crisis, built on friendship, grown in love, not perfect, but real in theirs. A year later at their wedding, Diego was the ring bearer, carrying the rings with pride. When Lucas and Martina kissed as husband and wife, he clapped louder than anyone. That night, as they danced, Martina whispered that sometimes she thought that drunken night outside the bar, when she was in trouble, had been the best thing that ever happened to her because it led her to him. Lucas held her close. He said she never pretended to forget. She had the courage to remember, to be vulnerable, to let him in. That made all the difference. Martina corrected him. He had made all the difference. He'd seen someone in trouble and hadn't walked by. He'd chosen to stop, to help, to care, and he did it every day. For her, for Diego, for her, for Diego. He made them feel safe, loved, whole. Dukas said they did the same for him. They'd saved him just as much as he'd saved her that night. They kept dancing, surrounded by friends and family, but aware of only each other. Two lonely people who had found a way to no longer be alone, be alone. A single dad who had risked his heart again. A woman who had found the courage to be vulnerable. And a little boy who now had two parents who loved him more than life itself. It started with a night of crisis, but it became something beautiful. Because sometimes saving someone else is how we save ourselves. And sometimes the happiest,